Yeah, yeah.
We are the epitome of Black female love.
It's easy for us as Black women to hold up the banner and the cause for everyone else. But again, who holds up the banner and the cause for us? What role does the church play in all of this stuff?
Is that we as a Black church are perpetuating the same behavior as a patriarchal evangelicals have been doing.
Right. And guess
church, but it's the sisters in the congregation.
But it's a lot of times it is the Black women who bring us down more, or push or try to silence our voices more in the Black church.
Hold
up. Hey, my sisters. Hello, hello, hello. We made it another week. How y'all doing?
Hallelujah.
Wonderfully well. Yes. Wonderfully well.
Blessed.
So let's start with you, Dr. Wallace. As our audience is coming in, hello, Karen. I'm Hori. Thank you for letting us know that you are here. Please, please, please put it in the chat. We're excited about our show on today. Let us know that you're here. Say hello to us. Let us know where you are listening from. What city? Where are you located? Hello, Yvette Green. Let's start with you, Dr. Wallace. How are things on your end? Well, what part of the country are you in? Are you in Georgia, in Oklahoma? Where you be?
I'll be home in Decatur, Georgia today. But it's been a whirlwind from Dallas to Oklahoma and back to Decatur, Atlanta area. So I'm doing good. I'm grateful and thankful for the trips. However, I am also grateful to be home in my own bed. Yes.
Okay, I see a lot of homecomings happen this weekend. I'm trying to figure out what kind of shirt you got on. That's not one of them BC some shirts, is it?
Yes, it is. It's a Wildcat. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Yes, it is. Absolutely. Wow. You better be glad
I'm glad your screen. You got that background on. We can't even see it. The Lord knows. The Lord knows. All right. So we want to welcome you, Edna Elam. So good to have you with us. Chriselle McDaniel from Grand Prairie. Hello. Thank you for being with us. Olympia McCracken, all the way from Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Thank you for joining us. Rafay Neesmith, it's so good to have you with us on today. Dr. Sarita Wright had a grand Parents' Day with her at today at school. And so she's hoping to join us later, but you all know, all of you out there who are grandparents, y'all know, y'all already know that she's not going to rush her time. All right, but she miss us, but she's not gonna rush her time. It's her day. All right. So Dr. Bradford, yes, hello. Thank you, Sarah Green. Absolutely, we did not see that. All right. So Dr. Bradford, how you be? How things going?
I was fine up until that little comment.
I am
doing. I'm actually doing good. I'm back in Dallas as of today for just a minute, and I'm grateful. It has been a great season, though, so I'm excited about what God is doing in this season of all of our lives. Oh, come on, Hori. We're going to let that be, Hori.
Well, you were talking about God. Let's not get distracted by the distractions.
Okay, go ahead. Right. This is a great season for all of us. So I'm grateful to know what God is doing and to be a recipient and a beneficiary of what God is doing.
Yeah.
Right. It's wonderful to be here.
Wow.
Wait, Burns. What was that, Wallace?
I said to be back together,
Okay.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Hopefully, be with us and it'll be all four of us again, But if you can, I understand.
Yeah, it is definitely good to be back. I would definitely agree.
Yeah.
That time away, it felt very different. So yes.
Yeah, yes. So, since you said you were in Decatur, Georgia, we want to start our conversation here since you are in your home state. You
Yes.
said you were in Decatur, Georgia, right? Georgia, because you all seem to have a candidate that's running against a very well-educated senator,
Wait,
and
can you say that again?
yeah, against a
Well,
very well-educated
But
okay.
senator.
it's somebody
Okay.
that went to school at her school now. She wants
Okay, that I don't know what you're
all
talking
over
about
Georgia.
because
You know,
folk
and
could have
she's
gone to
from
the school, but I'm talking, the only ones that matter are the ones that graduated from the school. Let's not get that twisted. All right.
Yeah, to say this is a bombshell is an understatement. Republicans who brushed off earlier reports from the AJC, from MSNBC, and other outlets of Walker's history of violence, his erratic behavior, his lies, his exaggerations on the campaign trail, they're now very, very nervous about his midterm chances. Not just because the Daily Beast alleges an act of brazen hypocrisy from a candidate who says he wants to support a total ban on abortion, but also because Herschel Walker's 23-year-old adult son has been so outspoken the last 2 days in condemning his father for running in the first place.
So you bring up his son. I do want to play a part of a video that he released just a couple of hours ago, doubling down essentially on what he tweeted out earlier. Let's watch that for just a moment, and then we'll talk.
He has 4 kids, 4 different women, wasn't in the house raising one of them. He was out having sex with other women. Do you care about family values? I'm just saying, don't lie. Don't lie on my mom. Don't lie on me. Don't lie on the lives you've destroyed and act like you're some moral family man. Y'all should care about that, conservatives.
So at this point, Greg, it's not just this woman making these allegations, which have been verified by the Daily Beast. We here at NBC have not yet seen some of these documents to verify that. But then you have this coming from inside his own family. Wondering how Republicans are reacting to all of this.
Yeah, it's raw. It's hard to watch. And we're not sure the impact of what this might look like on the campaign trail. But we already knew, even before this, there's a significant number of Republicans, conservatives, who were skeptical of Herschel Walker's candidacy, who were either going to skip the vote, they were going to vote for Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock, or they're going to vote for Libertarian. That split ticket trend was showing up in polls from the AJC and other outlets even before this. And now we could start seeing Republicans more aggressively seek to distance themselves from Herschel Walker.
I can say thank you, God. Hallelujah. I pray they do distance themselves. I pray they split the vote. I pray that Reverend Dr. Raphael Warnock is our senator again.
Well, let's
Okay, wait a minute.
let's look at the video.
A second, because see, I heard another one of your representatives from Georgia, Newt Gingrich, right? He's out of Georgia, right? I heard him on Fox News, and yeah, I got to listen to what other folk are listening to, y'all. Y'all can't just listen to what you know that agree with you, right?
Absolutely.
But I heard Newt Gingrich say that Herschel Walker was a Christian, he was a Christ man, and that he had a good agenda and he was a good man, and that they should support him. I'm
from Florida, and I got some swamp land to sell you if you buy that. If you believe that, I got some swamp land to sell you.
Well, we can say a whole lot of things on television to gain the support of fellow buffooners.
Yes.
So I don't care what he says. The facts are facts. And if someone is coming out of your own camp, be it abused, be it as it may, abandoned, okay. However, he's still saying my dad wasn't there. There are other reports. Allegedly, he paid for an abortion, but he is against abortion, no matter the circumstance. Make that make sense to me. Make it make sense.
And I see one of our viewers has said that another one of the repubs said she did not care what he had paid for, as long as they got him in office and regained control.
Yeah, and that is an issue.
That's
That is an issue. Control. Yeah, but Nothing to help the people, just control. And that's an issue.
And I'm just trying to figure out, before you was all talking about you was Georgia, and I saw your little your Bethune-Cookman shirt on. We know FAMU Rattlers rules Florida, but anyway, that here it is that you want, talking about swampland, but we asked you, how are you? You said you from Decatur, Georgia. Now all of a sudden, you say you from Florida. I'm from
both. I was
you
born
sounding like your
Florida,
candidate
I
now.
live in Decatur, and yes, I do not support anybody that says that because climate change was because China's air came over to the U.S. and distorted the air here, and that our good air went. Anybody that talks crazy nonsense, I'm not for them. That just ignorant. Not
ignorant. She's an ignorant.
Well, I don't know, about 70 million of y'all folk didn't think so in the 2020 election, so I'm not convinced yet.
I'm fearful. I'm fearful because it's still 51-49, and someone to be that
close.
It should not be that close with someone that has been spewing mistruths and craziness. It shouldn't be that close. 51-49.
Y'all keep acting like y'all not in America. Y'all know somebody made America great again. Y'all confuse me at times.
Listen here. It's time for me to introduce our guest.
Hold on a second. Because I think our topic today is on women conferences, and so before our guest comes up, Dr. Bradford, you sent this wonderful clip of something that happened back in September, and I've not been on social media that much, but I've heard some things on this side, on that side, and so I want us to kind of look at this clip, and then let's go ahead and introduce your guest, and before we bring the guest up, then we'll play this clip. How about that? Let's do it that way.
I'm all for whatever, because we're gonna get to it all, and I'm excited about it.
Okay, so
go ahead. I guess she needs no introduction, right? But I will oblige you. Reverend Dr. Renita J. Weems is a biblical scholar.
What's her name again?
Reverend Dr. Renita J. Weems.
Ooh, I feel
let me just do comma. Let me scratch all that and say Renita J. Weems, comma, PhD. Let's do it that way. Mm-hmm. She's a writer, an ordained minister, a public intellectual whose scholarly insights into modern faith, biblical text, and the role of spirituality in everyday lives. All right, she's got a lot of books. she's well learned, as my grandmother's well learned. She has a daughter. She's married. Let's just get to the guest. She is a wonderful woman of God. I want to introduce to you, I don't really have to do that. It is none other than Renita J. Weems, PhD, Old Testament scholar. With these, come on here. We love Dr. Weems. Hello there, Dr. Weems. How are you?
Thank you.
So Dr. Weems, we want to go ahead and ask you this general question. How have you been? Since we last saw you, and then we're going to throw a clip in, and we want you to jump into the conversation for today.
Listen, I've been doing well, and I thank God that I've had all my vaccinations. I've had my annual mammogram. I've had my primary care visit. I've got my teeth done. I got my colonoscopy coming up next week. Girl, I'm doing well. So I'm trying to tell y'all, I'm doing well. I got my eyeglasses checked, my eyes checked this morning. I can sit down and see PRJ. I don't know what that one is right there, but it is. So I think you all know when you got to go do that once a year and just kind of dread it, but you say, and then you get in your car and you get home and you say, Lord, I say thank you. I thank you.
I thank you. I can see with these glasses.
That's right. I couldn't see a thing without them. So all is well, and I do mean that. I'm grateful to God the blood pressure was doing well as well. So I'm grateful to God right now.
Well,
thank you.
Well, wonderful. Well, we have this clip, and you're here today to talk to us about women conferences. We have some questions and some other things, but we want to open with this clip first, and we'll jump in from there.
Okay.
Your dates are in October, September the what? You don't know she's I don't know. Somebody come tell me what is it? The 20th to the 23rd. The next year. I don't think that it would be appropriate for me to close the meeting that you might increase. Wait a minute, I'm about to give you the mic, but I forgot something. Wait, I got something else to give you. I pass this torch to you. Put it on your desk somewhere and may it forever burn. I didn't want a kind of torch that would go out when the meeting was over. So they designed this torch so it would last longer than me. May the power of God and the cloven tongues of fire rest upon you all of your life. In Jesus' name, you have all. It's done. So I've had my say. And I'm handing you the torch. And in the words of my last book, as I hand you this mic, don't try.
Yeah. So I'm just going to throw it out there. This passing of the torch to Bishop Jakes, Sarah Jakes. I want us to just talk about that for a moment. I remember this conference, this Woman Without Loose conference. I attended in 2020 for the first time, 22 years ago. And I remember all these women that were given a platform to preach. And of course, they preached mighty words. But I did not see this type of movement anywhere else. And I'm trying to figure out how and when did this occur, or what happened before that kind of paraded or catapulted this movement, if you will, Dr. Weems?
Well, it depends on what do you mean, this particular movement?
So this women's conference movement.
Yeah, the women's conference movement. If I'm not mistaken, the first, and I'm asking all of us to join in. I think it helped me remember. I think that the first Woman Thou Art Loose conference was sometime in the late 90s. Am I correct? Late 90s. I've heard some people say it was 2000. Some have said 1996, 1997, somewhere in the late 1990s. And I'm sure somebody in the comment section might be able to kind of give us some idea. I want.
Yeah, I know that I went and took a group of ladies. I was in South Carolina at the time, and that was the late 90s.
Late 90s, right? Good. And certainly the Woman Thou Art Loose is the largest that we know of. But I would like to put it on record that it was not the first Christian women's conference. There have women's conferences, Christian women's conferences, obviously, is much older than Woman Thou Art Loose.
1996.
Okay, 1996. Good. Thank you very much. So women's conferences, Christian women's conferences, are much older than Woman Thou Art Loose. It's no doubt dates back into the 20th century. And even earlier than the period that I am particularly aware of, because I was a part of that particular group, but certainly as early as the late 70s and early 80s, Black Christian women were meeting and having what we now think about as women's conferences or women's ministry conferences. In the area in which I lived at the time, and let me just begin to just say, I'm just talking about a particular period. I would say as early as 1980s, I know that I was on the East Coast and living in I think I was living in the New York, New Jersey area. And I know that one of my mentors, the Reverend Dr. Cecilia Williams Bryant, one of her first women's conferences. And when we talk about women's conference, I'm talking about the interdenominational, ecumenical women's conferences, where it was not just a local church conference and for the women of that church. I'm talking about the women's conferences that began to be non-denominational, interdenominational, ecumenical, using that kind of language, and it was also national and in some ways international women's conferences as well. So the platform was certainly ecumenical, interdenominational, or it was also national and international. I would say as early as the very early 80s. I'm familiar that Cecilia Bryant there in Baltimore was one of the earliest ones who put together a conference that I believe the title was called Behold the Woman. There in the Baltimore area. I know that Bishop Ernestine Cleveland Reams,
yes.
If I may. I don't know if I don't do anything else, I want to make sure I put, and I want everybody to type that her name was Reams, R-E-E.
That's right.
Yes, not W. Can I begin to tell you how many times I have been called Renita Reams? I'm sure she had been called before her passing earlier this year, Ernestine W-E-E, but she was Ernestine Cleveland Reams, who happens to be the aunt of Tremaine Hawkins, mind you. So the auntie of I think their mothers were sisters, and so Bishop Reams, in fact, if I may say again, I appreciate this conversation because it gives me an opportunity to put out there some historical data. I may not always have all the precise dates, but I want to put some things out so that if in this audience, there are those of you who are contemplating, anticipating working on a thesis, your DMin or your PhD one day, and you're looking for a thesis topic, I invite you, I implore you to take a look at the history of Christian women's conferences, what we also know as women's ministry conferences. Bishop Reams, now here's one thing that we may not hear. Bishop Ernestine Reams is one of those who helped give platform to Bishop T.D. Jakes. I was pregnant with my daughter is now 29 years old. So I gave birth to my daughter in 93. That means in 93, something like that. And I remember being at Ernestine Reams' International Women's Conference in Atlanta, Georgia in 19. So if I had her in 93, June 93, let's just say sometime in the fall of 92, I am pregnant at the Ernestine Reams meeting. I am doing a workshop. And I remember Bishop Ernestine Reams saying, "Now, ladies, I want you to go call your husbands if he's here at the hotel. I got a young fella downstairs doing a workshop for the men, and he is just so good. And his name is Thomas D. Jakes. I want you all to go down there and hear Thomas D. Jakes from West Virginia. He's doing I have him here doing a workshop for the men in the men's conference." Now, this is about 92. Mm-hmm. Now, Jakes had already been introduced, I believe, at the Azusa conference a few years earlier. Again, I'm giving some history here now. Yes. I'm dropping some important knowledge. But Ernestine Reams Women's Conference, which usually brought about 1,000 women wherever Bishop Ernestine Reams went. And she also is one of those who set the stage for T.D. Jakes to become well known in terms of launching his national ministry. So there was certainly Carlton Pilson with Azusa when he first allowed Jakes to speak from that platform. But it was also Bishop Ernestine Reams, who had preached for Jakes many a time there in West Virginia, because she was a traveling evangelist, but she also had a national women's conference as well. So I'm just trying to say that long before 1996, women had been organizing Christian women's conferences across the country. The one I particularly may know about is one that Cecilia Bryant started there in the Baltimore area, but I'm very much a part of the E.C. Reams International Women's Conferences as well, which usually drew something like sometimes 500, 1,000, 1,500 women, and on. And the ones that I have been a part of over the years, there at Allen Cathedral in New York, Ebenezer AME Church, churches out in the California area, the Texas area. Women have been conferencing and Christian women's conferences and interdenominational ecumenical women's conferences for several decades before Woman Thou Art Loose.
And I would offer Dr. Weems that they were also there before then. You got Nanny Burroughs, who started the women's clubs that I think is where these women's conferences may have even been birthed.
Right. Now, that's why I was saying long before even then. And so you're talking about the club movement by all means. You're also talking about Nana Hallenberg, catapulting women's auxiliaries in the Baptist church by all means, and taking the Baptist church on and wrestling them to the mat around women's ministry. This whole notion of Women's Day and women's work and ministry. Now, let me just kind of point something else out. And thank you for the person who did point out E.C. Reams Conference of 1993. Let me also, but in terms of a decidedly Christian women's conference, I am picking up sometime around the late 1970s. But certainly women have been conferencing and meeting, whether we're talking about sororities or whether we're talking about club women's organizations or whether we're talking about book clubs. Women have been meeting, but I think something decidedly took place. And I guess I want, and that's why I'm looking for church historians, and I'm calling them out, and I'm anointing and appointing some church historians here among your audience to say, what we are in desperate need of are those who are the historians that began to record this information and to write it down for us and publish it for us, so that history does not end up saying that the Woman Thou Art Loose Conference was the singular women's ministry, Christian women's conference of the late 20th and the beginning of the 21st century. That grieves me that women like E.C. Reams, Cecilia Bryant, and all these other women's conferences throughout the country get overshadowed. and herstory loses out to his story.
Mm-hmm.
And our story and our women's conferences may not have blown up to be 50,000, 100,000, and there are reasons for that. But we were out here doing this work a long time.
Amen.
You just said there's reasons for that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there are complicated, a lot of different kinds of reasons, but at the heart of it, I think that what happens is, I mean, obviously, those of us who are online, we are savvy enough to know. I don't want to take anything from Bishop Jakes at all, but he did and does have a kind of machinery behind him. The whole, I mean, I don't think there's anything that goes on at the Woman Thou Art Loose conference that has not and had not been going on at these women's conferences. Platforms of women preachers, women preaching about issues unique and specific to women, well, and talking about very personal kinds of issues in workshops. We all have our swag and our little journals and our little bags and all the little trinkets that go with the conference, and it's great music, same kind of thing at a lot of these conferences. But let's not underestimate, and let's put it on the table right now. But there is something about the maleness that we respond to, the maleness of now any number. I mean, you talk about from Evangelist Jackie McCullough to Carla Vaughn. Let me start naming these sisters who are hands down can pull it down in terms of talking about women preachers at a national, international level. Who, for me, were some impactful preaching that I heard. I would say Reverend Dr. Prathia Hall Wynn, the late Dr. Prathia Hall Wynn. These are women that I heard at conferences. These are, all kinds of women that I heard at conferences. But why did Woman Thou Art Loose take off the way that it did? There was something about women hearing a man talk about women's issues. And clearly Jakes does that extremely well. His ability to touch and talk about the pain and the trauma of women, the secret pain and the issues of violence and brokenheartedness and depression and sickness and the oppression of women by their men. So I think that was the kind of thing that captured the imagination of women that led to his conference being much larger, as well as the money that his conference and the backing and the sponsorship and all of those kinds of things. So patriarchy is very much so, and women's fascination with men talking about their issues.
Dr. Weems, there's a viewer who's asking the question. It's on the screen as well. Was it necessary for T.D. Jakes to publicly pass the mantle to his daughter, Sarah Jakes, as he did at Women Thou Art Loose?
I'm not sure. I don't know if it was necessary, but it was certainly impactful. I think he's very clear about his. I think, like many men and women at this age in their life, he's certainly concerned about legacy and very concerned about succession. Everybody in their 60s and 70s is looking back, and 50s are looking back and saying, who are we going to pass the mantle on? And so evidently he made the decision that he wanted to publicly not only pass the legacy on, but also to keep his dynasty intact.
In his family.
So let's be very clear about that. So no, it wasn't necessary, but I think it was certainly a smart business decision to pass the mantle on to his daughter.
Yeah, that's good business. That's good business sense, though.
Good business sense.
Yeah. It really is. Every business-minded person would love for us to have. Oh yeah, that's Carmen.
That's Carmen.
Yeah. Love for us to have a succession plan, and if we don't, we fail. We're failing to plan. So I think that was genius. I don't necessarily understand why it had to be public, but hey, I think his fan base, I'm going to use the word fan base to keep his fan base intact. Okay, I'm still here, but this is what we're doing going forward. Yeah, I on a lock. You're absolutely right. My goodness.
Yeah. I mean, listen, the question, I was with some women and we were asking, so why didn't he give it to Juanita Bynum? Why did he give it to his daughter? I mean, to keep it in-house, keep it within the family. I mean, it was a great business decision. And it was, listen, let's not deny that it had all of Black church theater and drama.
Come on here.
Pomp and circumstance. Oh, it was oily. It was so oily. It was so oily. So, you know, it just
Dr. Weems, Dr. Weems.
God, like it looked like it looked like all he had to have done at the end was to have been taken up into the sky like
just walk on a cloud.
Yeah, that's all he had to do. Anything that's all that was the only thing they're missing, that he had to walk off the stage with his wife. But oh my Savior, if they had created a lift that would have lifted him up, child, we would still be at they would still be at the convention center.
So we're talking about women's conferences, and some of us may assume that it is the same thing as women's movement. So let's kind of talk about the difference between the two, or why should we even separate them?
Women's conferences from what now? What did you? Just say that again.
So
I was reading the comments.
Women's movement, yeah, I know. Yeah. Women's movement versus women's conference movement. Yeah. I've been in several conversations whereby we say, well, it's the same thing. I would argue that it is not.
Yeah. I have been asking us I've been asking us, as particularly those of us who do the kind of work that you're doing here on this platform, the kind of weekly work that you do to bring conversations to women, to Christian women, to women of faith, to thinking women of faith, the work that you do and others are doing, trying to push the boundaries and give us a platform to think out loud about who we are and where we are in this particular faith era, and what matters to us as Black Christian women. I'm asking us to use this platform to also to help us kind of, dig deeper into some of our history. I do love history. So I'm saying, okay, we often say Christian women's ministry conferences, and we talk about women in ministry.
Yes.
And they are not the same thing. Yes. Women in ministry and women's ministry conferences. And so I've been using some of my platform to kind of remind people, first and foremost, that the whole notion of women's ministry is very modern. It's very new. Mm-hmm. No one was talking about women's ministry before the 1980s. Let's be very clear.
Yeah.
Okay. I have to remind people, there's women's ministry, and then there's women in ministry. But let me just begin to first say, this whole notion of a department in the church, an auxiliary, shall I say, an auxiliary in the church. That's the proper word in the church. Auxiliary. This auxiliary in the church called women's ministry, that was unheard of before the 80s. You were either a missionary, a deaconess, a stewardess,
yes,
willing worker, etc., etc., etc. But that, in terms of the women defined roles in the church, but women's ministry, a department, no such thing. We were part of those. That's where the auxiliaries were. Now, it might be helpful to ask, well, how did women's ministry get started? This movement, these conferences, I think now, again, I'm hoping someone will push back and tell me that I'm wrong. But I think when I think about the E.C. Weems conference, when I think about what Cecilia Bryant and others were doing, even across the country, and starting these kinds of conferences, it was the younger women in the church. Let me begin by saying this. I may be Reverend Dr. Renita Weems and all that other stuff, but I started off as a missionary in the AME church. I was
in the Baptist church.
Come on, WMS.
Yes, with that little doily on my head. So those of you who are online right now, at 32 years old, I had a doily on my head in my white. I was a missionary. And that was the acceptable way. That was the state. That was the phase. That's what you had to go through. That was the what am I talking about? What are your training camp, if you will, for doing work in the church as a woman in ministry, as a woman who wanted to do something called leadership, who wanted to have some kind of voice, for a woman who wanted to be involved in some, at least, and of course, obviously, I was in a Methodist church, and so we didn't call it women's ministry. Now it evolved into a separate from the deaconesses and the missionaries and the stewardesses, and the younger women in the church. And this is the piece that I'm hoping someone will understand. When, as more and more younger women were attending church, coming into the church and trying to find a place for themselves, and the kinds of questions that they brought, the gatekeepers, the missionaries, the deaconesses, and the stewardesses were resistant, shall we say?
The women's,
yes, the women's auxiliaries, the gatekeeping women's auxiliary were not as receptive to those of us who were younger. Now, of course, I was in, and I were able to do some things, but by and large, it became a separate movement of younger women, younger, oftentimes very educated women who had been influenced by the women's movement, if you will. And we don't typically talk about the ways in which feminism really did impact the Black church and Black women in the Black church. But the kinds of questions, the pushback on male leadership, the questioning about male leadership, the introduction of women's Bible studies, and the raising of the kinds of questions that we began to ask. There came a time when the missionaries wanted to say, whoa, we don't talk about that kind of stuff. And the missionaries became a bit resistant to some of the kinds of things that the younger women wanted to ask. And so the young women could have chosen to leave the church, but thanks be to God, many of them began to organize in separate cells that ultimately became what we now call the Women's Ministry Department, which ultimately grew larger than the auxiliaries and more powerful than the auxiliaries, the traditional auxiliaries. I'm seeing some questions.
Dr. Weems, so much going on in the chat.
That's so much. I know it.
So I mean, they're just going through. Let's deal with some of this stuff.
Yeah.
Let's go back to Dorothea Richard. She says, I think it was public to get the certain demographics of women who go to Women That Are Loose to now go to the Evolve conference because of the Okay, we said that.
Yes, I believe that.
Are we measuring the impact of these conferences? Are we? That's one question. Are we even able to measure it?
Yeah, I think so. I think that's what people who do that kind of work, social scientists, sociologists, that they are the ones who will be able to help us measure the impact and decide what is impact. What do we mean by impact of these
data?
And those kind of things. So I mean, there are people who do that for a living. It's not what I do for a living, but there are people who will be able to kind of say what, looking at breaking it down in terms of the demographics and interviewing the people who attended and asking what was the impact and the impact of the kinds of sermons. I mean, I want to just ask that now. Let me just really jump out there and really be provocative here. And that is the kind of preaching that I have heard at conferences like A Woman Thou Art Loose. Let me tell you how they are different, from the ones that I have heard and the ones that I have attended at other kinds of. Now, let's be clear. With all of the lights, camera, and action, with all of the drama and the set design and how large it is, these are still pretty conservative conferences.
Yeah,
this is still pretty conservative theology. This is not radical kinds of preaching. These the preachers, even the preachers who come on those stages, I know many of them and love them dearly, but they're very clear about what they can and cannot preach at the Woman Thou Art Loose conference. Now, I may not ever be invited back to anything, but let me just be very clear. Now, this is a very complementarian, patriarchal, woman thou art loose, kind of, sort of, maybe, but not that loose. Okay,
Right.
be very clear.
Amen.
It is setting women loose to be good girls, good wives, good nice ladies, but still, submissive to their husbands, and still understanding that the norm is marriage, and that singleness, you are waiting for your Boaz, or whatever all that kind of language is. Let's be very clear. This is not about women having their own agency. Please, let's be very clear about the theology, okay, you all? So let me just kind of take another little sip of my whatever I'm sipping here.
A little water.
So I can just say, let's be very clear about the theology. It is still pretty conservative, traditional, well packaged, but it is fundamentally very conservative, traditional kinds of preaching about headship and complementarian. Not that male and the gender roles are not equal, but complementary to each other.
Dr. Weems, if you heard somebody say, pray in Mother God, please knock me down, because I've never heard that in any of those conferences.
Oh no, that would never be that kind of thing. That would not be acceptable. That even if you got preachers there who do pray like that and preach like that, they would not necessarily say that. And that's what I'm asking those who are online, that the audience that you attract with timely wisdom will be women that I'm urging them to say, now take a look at the kinds of preaching. Believe me, many of those are preachers that I know, I have heard, I have been known to be slain emotionally by any number of them. So I'm not knocking that kind of preaching, but be very clear that it is still safe. It is always about getting over your trauma. It is always about what God is going to do for you. It is, and all of which I've needed as well, but it is not pushing any boundaries. It is not challenging. It's not challenging patriarchy. It's not challenging male power. It's not challenging. It doesn't even touch on politics. It's not touching on politics. It's not touching on heterosexism. It's not doing any of that. So for those for whom that matters, you often get that at the other conferences where the women are in charge and are able to say what we want to say.
And get the real deal.
There
are some other comments. We want to just go through them. I think it was Renee. This platform encourages and acknowledges many women on not such a large scale. So many powerful women are skipped over. Rosa Simpson, Pastor Simpson says, maybe women sharing with women is like singing to the choir. Comfort in knowing each other's plan. But a man addressing the issues of women tells the woman she is seen. I guess some women need that from a male figure.
I see. Yeah. Is that right?
What you say, Pastor?
I don't think that. I think that is totally underestimating what women do at women's conferences. And I don't think that the women at women's conferences of the ones that I know, and I'm sure it does happen, and I'm not saying every preacher at a women's conference conferences organized by women for women. I'm not saying every preacher does that, but I am saying that these are not preachers who get up and just say to women what women want to hear.
Right.
That's not what we are saying. We're talking about women who get up and say things that women don't want to hear, that push us. And because I know you, because I am a woman talking to a woman, I can, in fact, in many ways, I can push in ways that I believe that men or women and preachers can do in a way that men cannot. So yes, our point is, you are correct, Dr. Simpson, Pastor Simpson, that there are women for whom the male gaze is very important to them. To think that men know their pain is very important to them. And I am saying, and that's a problem. Why does it matter and even if he does know your pain, my point is that his prescription still is not for you to challenge anything. So yes, people, a male may know my pain, but I'm not so sure that the kinds of preaching sometimes that you get in those conferences are the kinds of preaching that changes why you're in pain.
Yeah, I see you. I see your pain, and I can identify with it. Now let's find something to get it right and fix it.
Yeah, that's right. That's correct.
So
yeah. No.
Donna Otis says the book History of Black Baptist Church by Wayne C. Croft briefly discusses the women's auxiliary in the National Baptist Convention. Oh, I know about that issue.
Yes.
Linnell Arps is saying, you're so right about the older women being so reserved and not questioning anything in the church and some of the topics that we're uncomfortable with, as if we have been saved all of our lives. Come on here.
Wow.
Monica Leaks, even some of the Black church history texts often do not go beyond a singular chapter.
Great point. Yeah, good point. Excellent point. Absolutely. Again, I want to make it clear that I'm not here trying to knock the woman down loose. I think that there are some problematic about it, but I'm not here to knock it. But I am here. What I'm more interested in is making sure that the women's conferences, the conferences organized by women, that have been going on much longer and more consistently than conference by Jakes, also is broadcast, and that we know about them. And I think that not enough of us know about those conferences and the great women who have done the work in creating the platform of these conferences, and the woman like Bishop E.C. Weems, who also gave Jakes his start in terms of women's conferencing. That's what I'm interested in.
Dr. Weems, one of the things that I loved about
just a second, Olympia McCracken.
Because I've attended conferences for Presbyterian women, and Women Without Loose was never on my radar. Dr. Weems, how would you recommend researching effective, or how would you recommend researching effective interdenominational conferences for women?
How would you recommend researching effective?
Yes.
Well, I mean, listen, just getting prepared for this conversation, I just did the simple thing of Google Christian women's conferences, and everything came up. You know, everybody has a Christian women's conference, and if you look for Black church women's conferences, everybody you find them out there. So everybody advertise. Everybody's on social right now. By all means. And I think one of the ways is that you follow, if you will. I mean, I'm just kind of thinking off my top of my mind. If you got speakers who you really enjoy, who you really appreciate, whose work you follow, whose preaching you follow, then follow where she, in this case, where she is speaking. Look at her itinerary to follow where she is speaking. I mean, so that's one of the ways you find out, well, what are some other kinds of conferences, and where are some of the people that I really do appreciate their preaching, their angle on the text, their commitment to certain themes in preaching. Where are they preaching? I think that's one of the ways that we now in 2022 that we have available to us that was not available to us in 1992. So there's no reason why we cannot. In every city, wherever you live, I'm sure there is a Christian women's conference that goes on every year.
Indeed.
Absolutely.
One of the things that I loved about Bishop E.C. Weems is that she opened her house for women and to pray at her feet, and to get up early in the morning to pray and walk. And like, Lord, but it was the teaching and the example that she displayed that walked us into our womanism, or even our prayer lives, you know. And I think that's what, in some areas, that's what's missing now. What are we doing ourselves to help others to really pray and to move in those areas of change?
Yeah. I think the other thing to keep in mind is that once you've got a conference that is as commercially successful as something like Woman Thou Art Loose, and what I'm sure people are hoping that Woman Evolved will turn into. Once you get into 50,000, 75,000, 100,000, it is really a spectator sport at that time. At that point, you are a spectator to what is going on. I can assure you that those of us who go to these, who have been at smaller, now for many of us, a 2,000 person conference is still large, but those of us at smaller conference, I can assure you one thing: the difference is that you are more likely to run into any of us in the hallway and to say hello to us. You can get to us after we preach. You will see us in the elevator. So it is, I mean, the smaller ones are more intimate. The smaller ones, the workshops are smaller, and you get the kind of attention that you perhaps are needing. I think those larger ones, again, I listen, it may sound like, oh, we see she's just trying, to be critical of the law. I am not trying to necessarily just be critical, but I'm saying in terms of getting your needs met, hearing a word tailor-made, and for someone to be able to address you in particular when you ask a question. I think the smaller ones have their place. They are much more intimate, and you are more likely to get direct access to the speaker and to engage people at a much smaller, intimate level.
Dr. Weems, I remember my first Women in Ministry conference in the 90s. I met you. And in that, I was thinking about becoming a New Testament scholar at that point. And I was in the process for becoming a CPE educator. And you allowed me, and I had no idea, using AOL, instant messaging. I didn't know what I was doing, but you kept saying, that's too much, Brenda. Just give me one question and let's talk about that. And then, but you opened the door for dialogue for my paper on womanist theology.
Thank you.
So I want to publicly say what I've not said to you, and what I have said to you, I'm sorry, in private. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I think that is that kind of hands-on touch, that kind of ability to kind of stop and say, yes, oh, okay, your name is Brenda Perry Wallace. Well, what is it that you want to do? And we can't always do that all the time, but you're more likely to be able to touch and be touched by speakers and workshop leaders. So, which gives me let me segue, and let me use this as a segue to talk about that. A lot of the women's ministry conferences were organized, again, one of the things I mentioned to one of you is that there's a difference between women's ministry and women in ministry. So I want to say that. But a lot of the women's ministry conferences, especially as they started in the 80s and 90s, or caught momentum in the 90s, were indeed, they were opportunities, one, to showcase women preachers, women emerging as public speakers. So that was exciting, and for a long time, it was the only place where we could preach on the regular, if you will. After Women's Day and Mother's Day, it was women's conferences that gave a number of us the ability to speak at a national platform, to gain the kind of confidence, to learn how to speak at a national conference. I must say that I cut my teeth. I tell everybody the reason why I'm still at this age and I still go to those conferences is because that's where those were the women who gave me my chance to learn the craft of not only speaking, but speaking at a national level. Those are the women who set the stage for me and invited me. It was not, I wasn't doing pastors' anniversaries. I wasn't doing church anniversaries. I may do those things now, but back then, the brothers weren't inviting women. We did Mother's Day and Women's Day, and that's about it. But it was the sisters organizing, and these are women organizing these conferences and giving women in ministry and women leaders, not just women in ministry, but oftentimes women in ministry, their opportunity. Let me mention something. In the 90s, I spoke a number of times to some nuns, Catholic nuns, and I never knew that nuns are also called women religious. They are not religious women, but women religious. Their organization is called Women Religious. They are referred to in the Catholic Church as women religious. I want to say that to say, so there is religious women, and then there are the technical copyrighted term for nuns is really women religious. So I'm saying women in ministry, women's ministry, there's overlap, but they are not necessarily the same. So when we talk about women's ministry, I'm talking about a movement. I'm talking about auxiliaries in the church. I'm talking about the auxiliaries in the church that came to become the platform and the forum for ministering to the needs of women, that began to pay particular attention to the needs and the questions and the concerns and the issues facing women. And that had not been done prior to the 80s in the same kind of way. I mean, it became explicit and direct. I hope I'm making myself clear on that.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes.
Clearly the missionary, let me say that clearly the stewardess department, the missionary department, willing workers, clearly they were ministering to women. If it was all women's auxiliary, clearly the women got something out of it. They no doubt had their Bible studies, but their task was not specifically to minister to women. You were missionaries in order to go out and evangelize outside of the church, but it was not one of your goals to minister to women. So I'm saying when women's ministries came on the scene, auxiliaries, departments, their explicit mission, that's the word I'm looking for, their mission was to minister to the needs of women in the church. That's the difference. The missionary department may have ministered to, but that was not their mission. The stewardesses may have ministered to the women in their auxiliary, but that was not their mission. The women's ministry auxiliaries came on the scene and made explicit, we are ministering to the needs of women in the church, not just in this organization.
That's powerful.
Now you got to be it. I mean, I'm a history nerd. I'm a geek for this kind of stuff. But I think that it's important to for us to kind of get those nuances, if you will.
Powerful.
Yeah, and let me just say, let me say, because again, I'm in the midst of thinking about so much of this, and I think Bradford, I think you were asking me, you were pushing me in this direction. Let's just kind of go there, and talk about the role or the impact of the feminist movement, of the women's movement, on the Black church. Now, come on, everybody. Let's not act like that did not have an impact. It's not insignificant that women began, Black women and white women and other women of other colors and races and ethnicity. It's not insignificant that our numbers swelled beginning in the 70s. Women came into ministry in large numbers. Women have been called to preach for centuries. But there is a reason, good historians are telling us, but what happened in the 70s that all of a sudden our numbers just swelled. And it's not insignificant that the 70s, 60s is usually known as the period of the Black national movement, the Black civil rights, Black power, Black nationalism. And the 70s is usually associated historically with the women's movement. So from the 60s to 70s, women began to kind of really mature within the Black Power movement or the Civil Rights movement and in the women's movement. And it naturally, and so since women were beginning to become so active and to find leadership positions in these tasks, it only makes sense that they will begin, now that they're getting jobs, and now that they are earning degrees, for us to bring that intellect with us to the church and say, well, by the way, why are there no women? Where are the women? What kind of preaching is this? Why can't I preach? So I think that our no, there were a number of us who came into the ministry in the late 70s and early 80s. I'm with the class of Vashti, and I'm a Mackenzie. I'm with a class. A number of us who came in around the early 80s, and there is a reason, because we are those who had just graduated from colleges where women were beginning to, and the 70s was a time when women were beginning to find their voice, to push the society and push our culture, even within the Black culture, around issues of gender and power and employment and birth control. All of those things were taking place in the 70s, and it would trickle down and begin to impact the church and the Black church.
Dr. Weems, we must continue this.
Yes, yes.
If you will come back at a later date, we'll work on the date. But our viewers are saying we need her back, so we're going to work that out, because this has been interesting and enlightening. Many of our viewers are thanking you for sharing the difference between the two, women in ministry and women's ministry.
Yes, thank you.
Amen. Dr. Burns.
Thank you again, Dr. Weems, for being with us. We asked those of you who did not have a chance to put in the chat that how much you appreciated Dr. Weems. I think the last time she was with us, she threw in her Cash App number, and y'all kept blessing her with the cha-chings.
Yes, y'all.
Cha-chings. What's that Cash App, Dr. Weems?
Girl, listen. Mother's on Medicare. Now, come on here. Y'all know mother is on Medicare. My memory gets better when I hear ka-ching.
Well, go ahead and hit us with your
I think it's Renita Weems. I'm pretty sure it's Renita Weems on Cash App, believe me. But I would do this for free. But if I don't have to, I will. But I'm fascinated with this topic, and obviously, I've got more years behind me than I do in front of me, and I fear that there are those of us who are getting ready to move off the scene. And those of you who are behind me will not know this history, and this history will get lost because we have not said it from our platforms, and we have not written about this. And I fear that this is going to get lost, and that history is going to absorb herstory. And when historians look back on this period, they're going to be talking about bishops in the Baptist church. They're going to be talking about woman, thou art loose. They're going to be talking about, how the church changed as a result of pandemic, and the impactful work of Black women in ministry and women's ministry, women leaders as chair of deacon boards and of deacon and of steward boards and of trustees board is going to get lost. So I think women's leadership is going to get lost, because they're going to remember the larger history things and forget the herstory things in the beginning of the 21st century.
Definitely. We'll call this part 2.
Yes.
Next week.
Thank you, Dr. Weems. Hang around backstage for us, please.
Okay, sure.
Yes. Next week, we will have none other than Dr. Daryl L. Jones, and the topic is sex and Black church. Guess what? We'll see you next week, same time, same place. We love you, and there's nothing that you'll ever be able to do about it. See you next week.